Rain tapped gently against the tall glass windows, each droplet catching the glow of golden lights that spilled from inside the restaurant. The city outside felt distant, blurred behind streaks of water and passing headlights, as if the world had softened its edges for the evening. Inside, everything was polished to perfection. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Cutlery rested with quiet precision. A low hum of conversation blended with the smooth notes of jazz drifting lazily through the air. It was the kind of place where appearances spoke first. Men in tailored suits leaned back in velvet chairs, their laughter controlled and confident. Women in elegant dresses moved with practiced grace, their presence as curated as the wine list. Every detail, from the gleaming marble floors to the subtle scent of expensive cologne, whispered exclusivity. And then the door opened. A faint gust of cool air slipped in as Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He didn't arrive with spectacle. No sudden hush fell across the room. No heads turned in recognition. He simply entered quietly, like a shadow crossing the edge of a flame. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, his coat simple, worn in the way that spoke more of comfort than status. There was no designer label announcing his worth, no polished shine demanding attention. For a brief moment, he stood just inside the doorway, letting the warmth settle over him. His eyes moved calmly across the room, not searching, not judging, just observing. There was a stillness to him, something grounded and unshaken, as if the noise of the world never quite reached where he stood. At the front, the host glanced up. The smile that had been so effortlessly welcoming moments before flickered, just slightly. It didn't disappear, but it changed, tightened, calculated. "Good evening," the host said, though the warmth in his voice didn't quite match the words. His gaze drifted quickly over Keanu's appearance, lingering just a second. Too long on the coat, the shoes, the lack of visible luxury. Keanu offered a small nod. "Table for one, please." Simple, polite, unassuming. But something in the air shifted. The host hesitated. It was subtle, so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But it was there, in the half-second pause before. He reached for the reservation book. In the way his eyes flicked toward the dining room, then back again. In the slight tightening of his jaw, as if silently calculating something that had nothing to do with availability. Around them, conversations continued, but a few glances began to drift their way. Not openly. Never openly. Just quick, passing looks, curious, dismissive, uncertain. He doesn't belong here. The thought wasn't spoken, but it moved quietly. Through the room, carried in raised eyebrows and fleeting expressions. "I'm sorry," the host said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. "Do you have a reservation?" Keanu shook his head gently. "No, I don't." Another pause. The host glanced at the nearly full dining area, though there were clearly a few empty tables tucked along the far side. His fingers tapped lightly against the podium, a silent rhythm betraying his hesitation. "We're quite busy tonight." Keanu followed his gaze briefly, noticing the open seats but saying nothing. His expression didn't change. There was no frustration, no irritation, only a quiet patience, as if he had seen this moment before in 100 different forms. "I don't mind waiting," he replied calmly. The host's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes shifting once more. Not to the tables this time, but to the people watching. To the expectations hanging in the air. To the unspoken rules of a place where image mattered just as much as service. Another staff member passed behind him, casting a quick glance at Keanu before leaning slightly closer to the host. A whisper. Barely audible. But enough. A judgment made in seconds. The host straightened. "I'm afraid that won't be possible tonight," he said, this time with a firmer edge. "Perhaps somewhere more casual might be available." It was a small sentence, carefully chosen, polite on the surface, but underneath, it carried weight. For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Not the loud kind, but something softer, heavier, the kind that lingers in the chest. Keanu stood there, rain still clinging faintly to his coat, the soft jazz continuing behind him as if nothing had happened. Then he nodded. Not in defeat, not in anger, just acknowledgement. "I understand," he said quietly. And in that moment, there was something almost invisible yet deeply powerful, an unshaken dignity that didn't demand recognition, didn't push back, didn't need to prove anything. He turned slightly, his gaze passing once more over the room. The laughter, the elegance, the people who had already decided who belonged and who didn't. Then, without another word, he stepped back toward the door. The rain was still falling when he left. Inside, the music never stopped. The door closed behind him with a soft, almost polite click, as though even it had learned not to disturb the carefully curated atmosphere inside. For a brief second, the host remained still. Fingers resting on the edge of the podium, eyes fixed on the spot where Keanu Reeves had just been standing. Then the world resumed. Glasses clinked again. Laughter rose back to its previous pitch. A waiter hurried past carrying a tray of sparkling drinks, weaving through tables with practiced ease. It was as if the moment had already been swallowed, filed, away, dismissed, forgotten, but not entirely. Near the corner of the room, a young waitress paused mid-step. Her name tag caught the light as she stood frozen for just a second too long, her attention lingering on the door. She hadn't heard everything, but she had seen enough. The hesitation, the shift in tone, the quiet dismissal. Something about it didn't sit right. "Hey!" A voice snapped softly from behind the bar. "Table 7's waiting." She blinked, pulled back into the rhythm of the night. "Right. Sorry." The tray in her hands felt heavier now, though nothing had changed. She moved forward, placing plates with careful precision, offering polite smiles that came just a fraction slower than before. But her thoughts kept drifting, back to the man who hadn't argued, hadn't protested, hadn't even looked surprised. That was the part that unsettled her the most. Outside, the rain had grown steadier, each drop striking the pavement with quiet persistence. Keanu Reeves stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool air wrapping around him again as the warmth of the restaurant faded behind glass and light. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply stood there. Cars passed in blurred streaks of white and red, their reflections stretching across the wet street like smudged paint. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded, sharp and impatient, before dissolving into the hum of the city. Keanu pulled his coat slightly tighter, though not out of discomfort. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as if the moment inside hadn't bruised him the way it might have bruised someone else. He glanced back. Through the rain-streaked window, the restaurant glowed, warm, inviting, untouched by what had just happened at its door. People leaned in close to one another, raising glasses, lost in conversations that felt important only within those walls. From the outside, it looked perfect. But Keanu's gaze didn't linger on the elegance. It shifted, subtle, observant, catching something else entirely. Inside, near the far end of the room, the same young waitress stood beside a table, her posture slightly tense. A man seated there was speaking sharply, his hand cutting through the air in frustration. Even without hearing the words, the tone was clear. The waitress nodded quickly, apologizing, her shoulders drawn just a little tighter with each passing second. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Keanu watched for a moment longer, his eyes steady, not judgmental but aware. There was a quiet understanding in his expression, something deeper than the brief encounter he'd just experienced. Then, slowly, He exhaled. Not a sigh of frustration, not regret, just release. The rain continued to fall, soft but relentless, tapping against his shoulders, sliding down the fabric of his coat. A few pedestrians hurried past him, heads lowered, each lost in their own urgency. None of them paid him any attention. To them, he was just another man standing in the rain. And maybe, in this moment, that's exactly what he was. But there was something else too, something unseen, quietly unfolding beneath the surface. Keanu took a step forward, then another, moving away from the restaurant without hesitation. His pace was unhurried, deliberate, as though he wasn't leaving something behind, but heading toward something else. Behind him, the golden glow of the restaurant began to fade, swallowed gradually by distance and rain. Inside, the night carried on. Orders were taken, plates were cleared. The host resumed his practiced smile, greeting new guests with effortless charm, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, a small flicker of unease remained. Brief, unwelcome, easy to ignore, so he ignored it. Because in places like this, the illusion mattered more than the truth. Outside, Keanu reached the corner of the street and paused again, his gaze drifting down the road where softer lights glowed in the distance. Less polished, less perfect, but warmer in a different way. For the first time that evening, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Then he turned and walked toward it. Part 3. The rain had softened to a steady whisper, no longer sharp against the pavement, but constant enough to blur the edges of the city. Streetlights stretched into long reflections beneath passing cars, and the hum of distant traffic felt calmer. Here, less demanding, less curated. Keanu Reeves walked without hurry, hands tucked lightly into his coat, his footsteps steady against the wet sidewalk. The glow of the upscale restaurant had long faded behind him, replaced now by smaller storefronts, places with flickering signs, fogged-up windows, and an honesty that didn't try too hard to impress. He stopped in front of a modest cafe. Its sign buzzed faintly overhead, one letter dimmer than the rest. Inside, warm yellow light spilled out through the glass, revealing mismatched chairs, simple wooden tables, and only a handful of people scattered quietly throughout. No polished marble, no velvet ropes, just life, unfiltered. For a moment, he simply looked. Then he stepped inside. A small bell above the door chimed, a soft, cheerful sound that immediately broke the silence. A woman behind the counter glanced up, her expression tired but kind. She didn't scan him, didn't measure him. She just smiled. "Welcome," she said, as if she meant it. The difference was immediate. Keanu gave a small nod in return, water, dripping lightly from his coat as he stepped forward. The air smelled of fresh coffee and something warm baking in the back. Simple, comforting, real. "Coffee?" the woman asked. "Yeah," he replied gently. "That sounds good." Her movements were unhurried as she prepared it, the quiet rhythm of the cafe settling around him. A man in the corner tapped lightly on a laptop. An elderly couple shared a pastry, speaking in low voices. Near the window, a young mother sat, with a little girl gently brushing damp hair away from the child's face. No one cared what anyone was wearing. No one cared who belonged. Keanu took a seat near the counter, wrapping his hands loosely around the warm cup when it was placed in front of him. "Thank you," he said. "You're out late," the woman replied with a faint smile. "So are you." She let out a small laugh at that, shaking her head. "Yeah, bills don't really care about the time." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. For a while, neither of them spoke. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just shared. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting briefly around the room again, taking in the small details most people overlooked. The chipped edge of a table, the way the little girl giggled quietly as her mother made a face. The tired, but determined posture of the woman behind the counter. Life, in its simplest form. "You don't see a lot of new faces this late," the woman said after a moment, leaning lightly against the counter. "Maybe I needed a different place tonight," Keanu answered. She studied him for just a second, not with suspicion, but curiosity. "Rough night?" He paused. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he didn't need to give the obvious one. "Something like that," he said calmly. Before she could respond, the door opened again, letting in another gust of damp air. A man stepped in quickly, slightly out of breath, glancing around as if searching for something or someone. His eyes landed on Keanu. He froze. At first, it was confusion. Then recognition hit, slow but undeniable. His posture straightened, his expression shifting from uncertainty to disbelief. "Wait, are you—" Keanu looked up, meeting his gaze with the same calm expression. The man took a hesitant step closer, lowering his voice instinctively, though there was no real need, in such a quiet place. You're Keanu Reeves, right?" The room didn't erupt. There were no gasps, no dramatic reactions, just a subtle shift, as if the air itself had leaned in slightly. Keanu offered a small, almost shy smile. "Yeah." The man blinked, letting out a quiet laugh of disbelief. "I just came from that restaurant down the street." They said something. "Happened. Someone got turned away, but I didn't realize it was—" He stopped himself, glancing toward the woman behind the counter, then back again. "They didn't know who you were," he said softly. Keanu shook his head once. "It's okay." But it wasn't just okay. Not entirely. The realization began to spread, not loudly, but steadily. The woman behind the counter looked between them, her expression shifting as the pieces fell into place. The young mother near the window glanced over, curiosity pulling her attention for just a moment longer than before. No one rushed him. No one treated him differently. And that, somehow, made the moment even more powerful. The man rubbed the back of his neck, still trying to process it. "That place, they're going to regret that." Keanu didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked down at his coffee, the faint steam rising into the quiet space between them. His reflection wavered slightly in the surface, distorted but steady. "Maybe," he said finally. But his tone carried something else, something deeper than simple consequence. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter. Something far. More unexpected. And as the rain continued to fall outside, tapping gently against the windows of a place that didn't care who you were, the night was only just beginning to reveal what truly mattered. The cafe settled back into its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted. Subtle, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. The air felt warmer, not because of the coffee or the soft lights, but because of the way the space held people without judgment. Keanu Reeves remained seated, his hands loosely wrapped around the cup as if grounding himself in the moment. Across from him, the man who had recognized him still looked slightly stunned, though the initial excitement had softened into something more respectful. "I still can't believe they turned you away," the man said quietly, glancing down at his own coffee. "That place, they pride themselves on exclusivity." Keanu gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but wasn't bitter either. "Yeah," he said simply. The woman behind the counter had grown quieter. She moved through her tasks more slowly now, her gaze drifting toward Keanu every so often. Not with awe, but with a kind of thoughtful curiosity. The realization of who he was hadn't changed how she treated him, but it had changed how she saw the moment, not as something ordinary, but as something important. Near the window, the young mother shifted in her seat, her daughter now leaning sleepily against her shoulder. She whispered something soft, brushing a strand of hair away from the child's face. There was a tiredness there, a weight carried quietly without complaint. Keanu noticed. He always noticed. After a moment, he stood, lifting his cup and walking toward the counter. The woman looked up as he approached, her expression returning to that same gentle kindness from before. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "It's good." There was a pause, not awkward, just open. Then Keanu reached into his pocket, placing a folded bill on the counter. The woman glanced down, and her eyes widened slightly. That's too much," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I can't take that for just a coffee." Keanu didn't pull his hand back. "It's not just for the coffee." She looked at him, confused for a second. "Then what is it for?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze shifted briefly toward the young mother by the window. The woman behind the counter followed his eyes, understanding dawning slowly across her face. "For whatever needs it," he said quietly. There was no performance in his voice, no attempt to be seen, just a simple statement, offered without expectation. The woman hesitated, clearly torn between pride and need. I don't know if I should." "You should," he said gently. The words weren't forceful, just certain. She swallowed, her fingers slowly closing over the money. "Thank you," she said softly, and this time, the gratitude in her voice was unmistakable. Keanu nodded once, then stepped back. At the table near the window, the young mother had noticed the exchange. Not the amount, not the details, but enough to understand. Their eyes met for just a brief second. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. But there was something in her expression, relief mixed with disbelief, that said more than words ever could. And that was enough. Behind him, the man who had recognized him leaned forward slightly. "You didn't have to do that," he said, though his tone suggested he knew exactly why Keanu had. "I know," Keanu replied. Another quiet moment passed. Outside, the rain began to ease, softening into a light drizzle that barely touched the ground. The storm was passing, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost intentional. Inside, however, something else was building. The cafe door opened again, this time with urgency. A couple stepped in, their clothes slightly damp, their expressions tense. They spoke quickly to the woman behind the counter, their voices low but anxious. She listened, nodding, her brow furrowing as she responded. Keanu didn't try to overhear, but he didn't need to. The tone was enough. The man from earlier shifted in his seat, glancing between them. "Looks like they're having a rough night, too," he muttered. Keanu's gaze lingered on the scene for a moment longer. Then he set his empty cup down. There was something changing, not just in the cafe, but in the direction the night was taking. Small moments, quiet decisions, threads beginning to connect in ways no one could fully see yet. He turned back toward the counter once more. "Do you ever get a lot of customers from that restaurant?" he asked. The woman shook her head lightly. "Not really, different crowd." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Outside, the last drops of rain slid from the edge of the awning, falling The street felt different now. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a quiet sheen on the pavement that reflected the city lights like broken mirrors. The air was cooler, calmer, but beneath that calm, something was shifting. You could feel it in the stillness. in the way people moved a little faster, spoke a little louder, as if reacting to something they didn't fully understand yet. Keanu Reeves stepped out of the cafe, the soft chime of the door fading behind him. For a moment, he stood on the sidewalk again. Same street, same night. But everything felt different from when he had first been turned away, because now the ripple had begun. Down the block, near the restaurant, a small crowd had started to gather, not large enough to draw full attention, but noticeable. A few people stood just outside the entrance, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Some glanced at their phones. Others looked back toward the glowing interior with expressions that no longer carried admiration, but curiosity, and something closer to judgment. Keanu noticed. Of course he did. He walked toward it, not quickly, not dramatically, just with that same steady pace, each step quiet, deliberate, as though he already understood where this was going. As he drew closer, voices became clearer. "I'm telling you it was him," one man insisted, holding his phone out as if it proved everything. "Someone posted about it already." "No way," another replied, though doubt lingered in his tone. "They wouldn't just throw him out like that." Apparently they did. A woman shook her head, glancing toward the restaurant doors. "That's bad. That's really bad." Inside, the tension had reached its breaking point. The manager stood near the entrance now, no longer composed, his earlier confidence unraveling with every passing minute. A staff member rushed up to him, whispering urgently. He listened, his face draining of color. "What do you mean it's online?" he demanded under his breath. The staff member swallowed. "Someone recognized him. They posted about it. It's spreading." The manager's jaw tightened. He glanced around the room, the dissatisfied customers, the subtle glances, the shift in energy that could no longer be ignored. This wasn't just a bad night anymore. This was becoming something else. Something bigger. Back outside, the cafe, customer who had recognized Keanu Reeves had followed at a distance, curiosity pulling him closer to the unfolding scene. He spotted Keanu near the edge of the small crowd and approached carefully. "You see?" he said quietly, almost breathless. "It's already blowing up." Keanu didn't respond right away. His gaze remained on the restaurant, on the people. Moving inside, the manager pacing, the staff trying to recover something that was already slipping away. The man stepped closer. "You should say something," he added. "Tell them who you are. Fix this." That made Keanu look at him, not sharply, not dismissively, just calmly. "Fix what?" he asked. The man hesitated, caught off guard. "I mean, what they did. They were wrong." Keanu held his gaze for a moment, then glanced back toward the restaurant. "They already showed who they are," he said quietly. The words weren't harsh, but they landed. Inside, the doors suddenly opened. The manager stepped out, scanning the small crowd with urgency, his eyes moving quickly, searching, calculating, hoping, and then he saw him. For a brief second, everything else disappeared. "Sir," the manager called out, stepping forward, his tone completely different now. No hesitation, no coldness, just desperation wrapped in politeness. The small crowd shifted, attention snapping instantly toward the moment. The manager approached Keanu Reeves, his posture stiff but eager, forcing a smile that didn't quite hold. I didn't realize earlier," he began, his voice slightly breathless. "There's been a misunderstanding. We would be honored to have you dine with us tonight. Please, your table is ready." The contrast was undeniable. Moments ago, there had been no space. Now, there was urgency to make space. Silence settled around them, not complete, but heavy enough to matter. Everyone waited. Keanu looked at him, really looked at him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something far more uncomfortable, understanding. You didn't misunderstand, he said calmly. The manager blinked, his smile faltering. Sir, I assure you. You made a choice, Keanu continued, his tone still steady, based on what you saw. The words weren't loud, but they cut through everything. The manager swallowed, struggling to recover. We can make this right. Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering that. Then he glanced, not at the restaurant, but back down the street, toward the cafe, toward the quiet place that had asked for nothing and given everything. When he spoke, again his voice was softer but somehow even more final. You already did. The manager frowned, confusion overtaking his expression, but Keanu had already stepped back. The moment had passed, and with it, something far more valuable than a table reservation. Around them, whispers began to rise again. Not chaotic, not loud, but enough to carry the weight of what had just happened, because this wasn't about a mistake anymore. It was about a truth, and that truth was only just beginning to unfold. The murmurs didn't fade this time. They spread. Not loudly, not like chaos, but like something sharper, more deliberate. People leaned closer to one another, voices low but charged, eyes shifting between the restaurant entrance and Keanu Reeves standing just a few steps away from it all, calm as ever. The manager remained frozen for a second too long. His offer still hung in the air, unanswered in the way that mattered. Not rejected with anger, but with something far worse. Quiet finality. Sir, please. He tried again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Let us make this right. Dinner is on the house. Anything you want. Anything. A word that had probably worked countless times before, but tonight it sounded hollow. Keanu didn't immediately respond. His eyes drifted past the manager, through the glass doors, into the restaurant where everything was still trying, desperately, to appear normal. Guests sat straighter than before. Conversations felt forced. Staff moved faster, but without rhythm. It wasn't elegance anymore. It was damage control. A couple near the window glanced outside, recognizing the moment unfolding. One of them subtly lifted a phone, pretending not to record, but clearly doing exactly that. The illusion was cracking, and everyone could feel it. Keanu stepped slightly to the side, creating a bit of distance, not just physically, but symbolically. His presence no longer belonged to that doorway. You don't need to give me anything, he said quietly. The manager's face tightened. It's the least we can do. That's the problem, Keanu interrupted, not harshly, but firmly. Enough to stop him. The words settled heavily between them. For a brief second, the manager had no response, because deep down, he understood. This wasn't about a free meal. It never was. Keanu turned slightly, his gaze shifting back toward the street, the direction of the cafe. The faint glow from its windows seemed almost distant now, but somehow more real than everything behind him. I walked in, he continued, his voice calm, measured, same as anyone else. The crowd had grown quieter, pulled into the moment without even realizing it. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. No accusation, just truth. The manager's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Out. For the first time that night, he wasn't managing anything. He was exposed. Keanu took another step back, giving the space back to the man who had tried to control it. But someone else looked at me, he added, his tone softening just a little, and didn't need to decide anything. A subtle shift moved through the small crowd, understanding beginning to land piece by piece. Back inside the restaurant, the young waitress from earlier stood near the edge of the room, watching through the glass. Her expression wasn't just guilt anymore, it was realization. The kind that changes how you see everything after it. She had felt something was wrong. Now she knew. Outside, the manager finally spoke again, though his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. We can change. Give us a chance. Keanu looked at him, not dismissing him but not accepting the offer either. Change doesn't start when someone important is watching, he said quietly. It starts when no one is. That landed harder than anything else because it couldn't be argued. The manager's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of the moment settling in fully now. Around them, the whispers had turned into something else. Not gossip, not curiosity, judgment, but not the shallow kind from earlier. This was different. This was earned. Keanu reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something small, a folded piece of paper. He held it for a second, then stepped forward and placed it gently on the host stand. Beside the manager, the man frowned, confused. What is this? Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced once more at the restaurant, at the people inside, at the version of success it tried so hard to protect. Then he looked back at the manager. I came here for a reason tonight, he said. That was new. The crowd leaned in, not physically, but emotionally. A real one. The manager's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Keanu straightened slightly, his expression unchanged, but the weight of his words shifting into something deeper. I've been working on something, he continued. A project. Quietly. The manager looked down at the paper, then back up again, confusion mixing with unease. What kind of project? Keanu's gaze drifted again, past him, beyond the restaurant, toward something else entirely. Places. Like this, he said. Spaces that decide who matters, before they even speak. The air felt different now. He wasn't just talking about one night. He was talking about something. For a moment, no one moved. The street, still damp from the rain, seemed to hold its breath as Keanu Reeves walked away, not in anger, not in triumph, but with the same quiet certainty he had carried all night. The crowd parted slightly without being asked, eyes following him as if they were witnessing something they didn't fully understand yet, but knew they wouldn't forget. Behind him, the manager stood frozen at the host stand, the folded paper, still resting in his hand. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it weighed, but because of what it meant. Open it, someone whispered from the crowd. He hesitated. Then slowly, he did. The paper unfolded with a faint crease, revealing a clean, simple document. No branding, no grand announcement. Just a proposal. But as his eyes scanned the words, his expression changed. Confusion, then realization, then something deeper. Regret. It wasn't just any proposal. It outlined a quiet initiative, funding for small businesses, community spaces, places built not on status, but on inclusion. Places that valued people before appearances. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. I was looking for somewhere that understood this, without needing to be told. The manager's grip tightened slightly. Because he understood now, he hadn't just turned away a customer. He had turned away an opportunity that would never come back. Inside the restaurant, the illusion had completely unraveled. Conversations had dulled into uneasy murmurs. Some guests stood, placing money on tables without finishing their meals. Others looked toward the door, not curious anymore, but disappointed. The young waitress stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed on the paper in the manager's hands. What is it? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away, because saying it out loud would make it real. Outside, a few people began speaking more openly now, their voices no longer hushed. They judged him the second he walked in. That cafe down the street treated him better without even knowing who he was. That says everything. And it did. Because this was never about fame. It was about instinct. About who you choose to be when there's nothing to gain. A few blocks away, the cafe still glowed with quiet warmth. Inside, life continued as it had before, simple, steady, real. The woman behind the counter wiped down a table, unaware of just how much her night had already changed. The young mother sat a little more at ease now, her child resting peacefully beside her. The man with the laptop typed away, occasionally glancing up at the door. And then it opened. The bell chimed softly as Keanu Reeves stepped back inside. The woman behind the counter looked up, surprised, but this time her smile came instantly. "You're back." "Yeah," he said gently. No cameras followed him, no crowd, just the same quiet space that had welcomed him before. He walked up to the counter, reaching into his coat again, but this time it wasn't just a folded bill. He placed a thicker envelope down, sliding it toward her. She frowned slightly. "What's this?" "Something to help," he replied. She hesitated, her hands hovering over it. "I told you, I can't just—" "It's not charity," he said softly. That made her pause. He met her eyes, not as someone above her, not as someone giving something away, but as someone recognizing something real. "It's an investment." The word hung in the air, her brows pulled together slightly. "In what?" Keanu glanced. Around the cafe, the worn tables, the tired walls, the people inside who didn't pretend to be anything other than who they were. "In this," he said. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full. Because in that moment, everything connected. The kindness, the choice to stay open, the way she had welcomed him without hesitation, without judgment. She hadn't known who he was, and that was exactly why it mattered. Her eyes softened, emotion rising quietly as she finally rested her hand on the envelope. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. And she didn't, because some moments don't need words. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that something small but powerful had just shifted. Not in headlines. Not in noise, but in truth. Back at the restaurant, the lights still shone, but they felt colder now, emptier, a place that had everything, except the one thing it couldn't buy back. And as the night came to a close, one thing became clear to everyone who had witnessed. Even a piece of it. Respect isn't earned by status. It's revealed in moments no one thinks matter. And sometimes, those are the only moments that do.